Hi, everyone. It's great to see a crowd here for the book, The Great Upheaval, which is so perfect for this particular conference that we're at. And I want to introduce the speaker, or the author, Arthur Levine. He's a professor of scholar of higher education at NYU, former president of Teachers College and the Woodrow Wilson Foundation. But more importantly, he's here to talk about a book that's really important for the whole discussion that we've been having here at ASU+GSV on the future of higher education. And it's called The Great Upheaval. A lot of the sessions I've been to today really hinted at something that your book makes very clear, Arthur, and that is how much the pandemic has accelerated a change in higher education, which, as you know, usually moves at a glacial pace. I'm curious as to how fast you see this acceleration and where you see it going.
Hello, everybody. It's been really interesting to me. During the pandemic last spring, I called up lots of college presidents. And for the most part, what they told me was, as they looked at the pandemic, they said, can't wait to get past this, and essentially back to 2019.
That's not going to happen.
No, it's not. 2019 is never going to happen. The pandemic was an accelerator. It wasn't a departure. And as a consequence, what we saw during the pandemic was we saw a lot of colleges being pushed to the edge that have been saved by the federal government. We've seen a quick expansion of online learning. And we've also seen is a dramatic outpouring of new producers of content and distributors. And finally, what we're seeing is a real demand for just-in-time education caused by the job loss during the pandemic, but other factors as well.
It was really fascinating this morning when this was the discussion. I heard two things that were really clear. One was the folks at Western Governors saying, hey, this is what we've been saying all along, welcome to our world. And then the president of Morehouse saying, you know what? When we started the pandemic, all of the faculty were against having any kind of online learning, and all of a sudden, everyone has had to adapt. So that's what you talk about not changing since 2019, and also we have a lot of uncertainty this fall. So have we already learned a bunch of lessons from this last terrible year that will translate into what traditional higher ed is doing?
It really remains to be seen. We've been taught a lot of things, we've been shown a lot of things. The question is, what persistence will they have? It's clear, for example, that we're not going back to 2019 levels of online learning. And it's also clear we're not going to 2020. We'll find a new normal somewhere in between. So, given all the options, the question is, will people have magical thinking, not a problem, institutional excellence, we are so good that can't happen to us? Or will they just ignore everything around them? Or will they move forward and think about a brand new future?
Well, that's what a lot of people here are doing, and I think that's what the president of Western Governors was talking about. He said this should be music to your ears. But as you know from years of coming to this conference, a lot of innovations are here today, gone tomorrow. I'm curious as to what are some of the emerging technologies and ideas and concepts for higher education that you think might endure and be accelerated.
What was fascinating during the pandemic was who thrived and who got hurt. We found was traditional colleges and universities lost enrollment during the pandemic for the most part, but the non-traditional creators and providers just boomed. And probably the prime example is Coursera. If you look at Coursera, its enrollments during the pandemic increased by 25 million, which is more than the entire enrollment in higher education. So what we've learned there is that education which is cheap, which is fast, which is easily accessible, which is unbundled, is really appealing to a lot of students.
But the competition for some of the most elite four-year schools was higher than ever this year. And so I'm just curious if you think this kind of traditional appetite for four-year higher education is really, I don't like to use the word disrupted, but diminished by these trends.
I think what's going to happen is every institution in the country is going to be touched by the dramatic changes in the economy, technology, and demographics, every one of them. But some are going to be touched more than others. So that we're going to see are three outcomes. One outcome is some institutions are going to close.
Some already are.
And the number would be larger for warrant for federal help. Second thing we're going to see is some institutions are going to make it through the dramatic changes by adaptation. And what I mean there is they'll be able to do successive reforms and make it through this period. And the institutions that are most likely to be able to do that are those that are in some way unique. That is, two examples, research universities. What's true about them is we need researchers. We need to prepare the next generation of researchers. And so they have a reason to survive. Residential colleges, we're still going to have, although only 18% of all college students are 18 to 22, full-time, and living on campus, what we're really going to see in the years to come is that people are still going to want that. There's going to be some segment of the population that's going to want that. Both research universities and residential colleges will shrink in size, depending upon region. The other thing that's going to happen is institutions that are not distinctive, which don't have a reason to exist, and which students are more likely to come simply to take their courses and go home, are really ripe for disruption. And those include institutions like community colleges and regional public universities, regional private universities.
Many of them are consolidating, as you can see with the regional public universities, and Pennsylvania is a great example. But let's talk about community colleges a little bit, because I was just in a session about what happens if you make community colleges free, and you know we have a first lady who also teaches at a community college, and a president who says that that's something that's really important to his agenda. If community colleges are free, does that leave room for all of these other innovators? Because that's a pretty appealing thing for people to have a free opportunity to go to college for 2 years and then maybe transfer or get skills in line with the workforce if the community colleges are keeping up with those skills?
I think the real question is, what do 2 free years of college mean? Is it 2 free years of college or 2 free years of post-secondary education? And one of the things that strikes me is Coursera is now offering a certificate in IT. And it's $59 a month, and they say it takes about 5 months to get through it. And they give a certificate from Google upon the completion. Okay, so cheap, low cost, prestigious credential. Would I rather have that, or would I rather have a credential from the local community college, which probably costs more and probably takes longer, and doesn't have the stature, or the local regional university, for which the problems are the same? I think there's going to be a very real competition.
But at the same time, there's a certain value that you get from being in person and on campus. And some of these innovations that you're talking about eliminate that possibility. And a lot of people are really sick of Zoom. If you talk to college students, I'm sick of it. If you talk to a lot of college students who missed this year, for example, and spent a lot of time just watching their professors, they're desperate. Okay, they maybe not calling it normal, but they're desperate for in-person instruction, and recent research and polls have borne that out.
I took this session so seriously, I'm wearing my Zoom shirt. What I should say, though, is that when we look back at what online education looks like now, it's going to seem primitive. That we're going to see that become more and more interactive. It's going to use more of artificial intelligence. It's going to use more virtual and artificial reality. We'll be able to create whole campuses. And the fact of the matter is, when we look at the issue, and by the way, I'm a product of traditional higher education. I was president of a small liberal arts college. My daughters went to small liberal arts colleges. I really liked them. But that doesn't mean they have a positive future. What's going to happen is, when I was at Harvard, I went to visit a friend of mine, Robert Coles, and he was teaching this course in Memorial Hall, which is this huge barn of a building.
Covered with ivy.
Right, absolutely. And when I looked at the front of the room, there was this itsy-bitsy little guy. And that was Robert Coles. If that isn't distance learning, I don't know what is. The reality is, one's going to get better, and higher education's best chance. The best of higher education was once defined by President Garfield as Mark Hopkins, the president of Williams, on one end of a log and a student on the other. The more loggy and Mark Hopkinsy universities can become, the more hands-on, the better the chance they have. If they want students to come face-to-face, they ought to offer something face-to-face that's high touch.
What other kinds of things? Because in recent years, we've seen a proliferation of like an arms race on campus, right? To put in the beautiful gym and climbing walls, and at least at four-year competitive schools, right? And one of them, as I went looking for schools with my kids, give you a tour on what are those like motorized scooter things, and you get all these amenities in the dorms and the walls and the lazy rivers and all those kinds of things. So virtual reality can't put you in a little pool like that, and it also can't put you in a classroom where you're going to meet people from all over the world the way you can in person. What other things can colleges do? You said they're going to have to offer a lot, and I will agree because the prices are out of control. At the Hechinger Report, we did a predictive analysis and found out that the University of Chicago, for example, is going to be the first to top $100,000 a year.
That's terrific.
For a few, and not too far off from now, 2025, I believe, or something close to that. Maybe it's 2045, but we're heading in that direction, it's quite clear. So you're probably striking fear into the heart of a lot of liberal arts colleges with this book and with some of your pronouncements and predictions. So what can they do, aside from throw up their hands and say, it's coming for us?
I don't think they need to do that. I think there are really prospects for liberal arts colleges in this country. The fact of the matter is, we do have too many colleges in the Northeast, Midwest, and Middle Atlantic to accommodate the population. And we have too few on the West Coast. So that's going to cause some problems. But the institutions that survive will have done several things. One thing is they're going to realize we're not back at 2019. Second, that they're not in the campus credit and course business. They're in the education business. Second, or third, I think I'm up to third. Third, what's going to happen is when colleges are really successful, historically, going back to the Middle Ages, they've had one foot in the library, human heritage, and one foot in the street, the realities of everyday life. When the world changes really quickly, as it's doing today, as it did during the Industrial Revolution, what happens is that colleges lose traction with the street. And one of the things that they have to do is restore their connection. They need to prepare students for the real world they're going to enter today. They have to put the learner first and the preparation the learner needs for this world. And the last thing that they really need to do is be distinctive. I had, in the course of the research for the book, I had lunch with a trustee who was, God, he looked so sad. And he was on the board of a college that was declining in enrollment, and they were investing in all kinds of new programs. Let's get in students of color. I know, let's create health programs. I know, let's create online programs. And they did all of that, and their enrollments continued to decline.
And completion rates are horrible as well.
This place had a decent completion rate, but it wasn't any better than its peers. When I asked what made the place special, the guy said, our long, long heritage.
That's not good enough these days, is it?
That could be a negative, which is to say, in an age in which our long heritage includes racism, systematic racism, is that what I really want to hear? And the other thing that it did was they're expensive, and their campus isn't much prettier than any other campus. Why ever would I send my kid there?
Yeah, you make a really good point. And then the other thing you talk a lot about in your book, too, is the changing demographics of this country. We're going to be a minority country by 2025, I believe. And also, higher education has a history of inequality, and it's really and it's expensive as well. That campus that you're talking about, what do you think the tuition and room and board was? Since you're not going to mention what campus was. So how are we going to be addressing the new demographics and the changing population and the changing needs? I mean, over half of U.S. college students are adults.
The new demographics are really problematic, which is to say, yeah, we will be a nation of minority populations. That'll be a majority by 2045. What that means is that the fastest growing groups in American society are the ones with which colleges and universities have been least successful. What it also means is that the fastest growing populations are among the lowest income. So the average income for a black family, average, is less than the sticker price for a private college for a year. So that the question's going to be, how do we make this reasonable for kids to be able to go to college? How do we attract them? We desperately need them in the labor force, if nothing else. It's also the right thing to do. What are we willing to do with our federal programs for those students? The second issue is it's the population problem. The population of the U.S. is moving from the Northeast, Middle Atlantic, and New England to the South and the West. So now 62% of the population lives in the West and South versus 38% in 1960. So the problem we have is we have too many colleges in the Northeast and the other shrinking regions, not enough kids to fill the classrooms. And what we also have is an incapacity and inability to absorb all the students who are going to come to West and South. And I think the interesting thing here is, if we're looking for where innovation is going to occur in higher ed, look for the troubled colleges. They're looking for silver bullets, and some will find them. If we're looking for experiments at scale, go to the West and the South. I don't know how Calbright is going to work out, but it's an institution that's promising. It's a community college, online, that's promising to prepare people for the work world, giving short programs leading to credentials, not degrees. In many respects, that's the future.
Well, you also mentioned in the book that some companies are offering the credentials, like Google, which kind of bypasses all of this entirely. Talk a little bit about what you found that and how that plays into how you see the future of higher ed playing out.
It is truly amazing. Right now, one can take courses from Price Waterhouse, from Dannon and L'Oreal, and Amazon, Alibaba. All of those are offering courses in their fields. Plus, we're seeing things like museums. The Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Natural History Museum in New York is offering a doctoral degree in astrophysics.
Online, of course.
No, that may be in person. I have no idea. And it's offering professional development programs for teachers. What's striking to me is that a number of years ago, I went to visit a publisher. And I was looking at his wall, and it was covered with books. And he looked at me and he said, "No, we're not in the book business anymore." So I rolled my eyes, and he said, "Yeah, we're in the knowledge business." And that got a really good eye roll. And then he said, "Let me give you an example." And the translation was, "Let me give you an example that even you can understand." And what he said is, we're now in something like 12,000 schools, and we are providing professional development for those teachers. And what I realized was, we had nothing like that penetration. And I was president of Teachers College. This guy was saying he was going to compete against me. But I figured I still had the edge. I could give out degrees and he couldn't. But first I asked him, "Where do you get your content from?" Because we had professors to provide content. And he said, "I hire full-time content providers." And it occurred to me, I didn't know any full-time content providers. None of my relatives or friends were full-time content providers. So I turned to this guy and I said, "What's a full-time content provider?" So he described them to me, and it turned out I just had a different name for them.
What did you call them?
I called them professors. We were hiring the same people, and I couldn't offer stock options. I could have, but they were too smart to take them. Finally, I asked about credentials, and I asked about degrees. I figured I still have the edge. And he said, "We're not there yet." And I sighed in relief. Do you know what? That company is now giving out degrees and micro-credentials. We're going to see all kinds of organizations get into the business of education that were never there before. And it's going to provide real competition for higher education. And more than being afraid of it or cowering, what we have to do is understand it.
Well, higher ed has been slow to embrace it, as we pointed out. And even a few years ago, I went to one of your talks about this, and you predicted some of these trends. But during the course of researching your book, you went deep into what the movie industry, the film industry, and the music industry has done, and how much quicker they have turned things around. Talk a little bit about how that impacts higher ed and your thinking about the two different paces.
My book looked at change in three ways. First, it looked at it historically. We've been here before. We've already gone through a transformation during the industrial era. It looked at it in terms of economics, demographics, and technology. But the final piece, so one was looking forward, one was looking backward, and the final piece was looking sideways. One of the interesting things is that a number of industries have been forced to change more quickly than higher education. It turns out higher education changes incrementally, and we do it by repairing the existing organizations. In for-profit, what they do is replace the existing organizations if they're not functioning. So I looked at three knowledge industries. I looked at film, I looked at music, and I looked at newspapers.
Where are they? They're gone.
I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. And what happened was each created a model during the industrial era, and it really lasted for a long time. They figured out how to deal with competitors like television or radio or other forms of communication. They figured out how to deal with government regulation. But they were all undone by digital technology. So what we saw was they were entirely unready for the kinds of things that Netflix produced, that we saw happening with Facebook and news, that we've seen happening with Amazon Prime and music. So there are valuable lessons there. One lesson is, and it's something I just said, you can't ignore the competition. The second lesson is that you can't adapt to some of this. You're going to try to adapt. Their go-to response was not to change significantly, but just try to do what we're doing a little differently. When they innovated, what they did was, again, they threw a whole bunch of solutions against the wall. And when they didn't work, they took that to be ratification of what they were already doing. What they also did was, having gotten through the demographics, the economics, they just thought we'd get through the technology. They just had no idea. What they also lost track of was the consumers. The consumers didn't want to buy a whole newspaper or a whole record or even a whole film series. And they wanted them unbundled, and that's how they bought them.
Anytime, anywhere.
That's it. And there's every reason to believe that's going to happen to higher education as well. Not because I want it to, but because consumers are used to getting it. They're really going to ask that higher education behave the way that Amazon does. That you be able to do it 24/7. They'd be able to do it any place. They'd be able to choose the content. And that's going to create a whole nother world.
So the only four-year schools that are going to survive, the ones you mentioned earlier that offer something really special, are they only ones that are going to survive this, the ones that have been deeply in demand for decades and throughout their history?
I don't think so. What occurs to me is some of it's regional. Mm-hmm. If you really expect to survive in the Northeast or the Midwest, you really do need to be special if you're a small, private, low-endowed, low-selectivity college. You gotta offer something nobody else offers. If you're in the West and South, there's a paucity of higher education. And the reality is that they're not facing the same threat others are. So where you are will help determine the future.
Right.
And that's a hard phenomenon for many schools.
It's going to be hard for a lot of people to hear this, and hard for them even during the course of writing this book. Did you talk to some of the folks that you were making pronouncements about their futures, about what you predicted? I mean, I imagine there'd be striking a lot of fear and discomfort.
It depended upon the audience. For the last 3 years, I gave presentations on the history part, on the on the forces, and on looking sideways. And lo and behold, the people who attend ASU+GSV were thrilled to hear about what happened sideways, thinking, that's me, that's me. But when I gave a talk recently to the Catholic Colleges of America, the report seemed really depressing. But the really good news is, if you're in higher education, you're being handed an opportunity that generations don't typically get. Yeah, all this is daunting, but it's not insurmountable. And what we're being offered is an opportunity to reshape the nature of higher education. Very few generations, last time being more than a century ago, have that opportunity.
For better or for worse.
For better or for worse.
Which reminds me that I would love to see if there's anyone in the audience who would like to ask questions of Arthur. I have so many more, but I'd love to give you all an opportunity. Just raise your hand high, and I will repeat the question. There's really bright lights, but right there in the orange.
Let me ask for a favor. Tell me who you are. I can barely see you.
Yeah, we can't see you, but...
Thanks.
This morning's
That's a great question. She wants to know about character education, right, and how that plays out in a digital world.
Here's my real fear, that we'll create two worlds of higher education. And one world of higher education will be residential. It'll be attended largely by wealthier people. It'll offer liberal arts and other kinds of subject matters. And the other one will be online. It'll be cheaper. It'll be faster. And it'll be more accessible. And there's a very real danger that the former will be attended by the wealthier people in the country, and the latter will be attended by people who are less wealthy. In essence, we could create two separate and unequal systems. And there are things we can do about that. But what's going to happen inevitably, once you can choose and once you can unbundle, it means I can take what I want to take, not what you tell me I have to take. And there's a real question about the future of general education. It's something that colleges are going to have to, in some ways, blend with their major and concentration studies, as they haven't done it before. My big fear is that All Things Considered, the radio show, will soon become One Thing Considered. Whatever you want considered, there's a show for it. And the other piece of it, I think, is that the role of providing common learning will fall increasingly to the schools, where we can have a common curriculum.
Okay, fascinating. I have a question right here. Yeah, she wants to hear a little bit more about community colleges being ripe for disruption.
And what it's about is this. When you look at the population who went to Coursera, for example, or the new other online programs, they mirror community colleges. They're older, they're less white, they're less wealthy, they're working. And one of the problems we're seeing now with colleges is that a growing number of students, traditional and non-traditional, according to a study I did, are spending much less time on campus. They don't participate in college activities to the degree they once did. Most of the activities they attend, even those that are college-related, aren't college-sponsored. They don't use the gym. They don't use the lectures. They don't go to events. And if you're not using those things, and it's hard to find a parking spot, and it's hard to register, and...
Yeah, that's where the for-profits have them. But I do want to point out that a lot of students that we've written about who've attended those for-profit institutions end up in a great deal of debt without a degree. So we have to be careful not to glorify them.
And again, I'm not trying to glorify for-profit institutions, and I'm probably going to make some enemies by saying this. I think for-profit institutions in the main, particularly the biggest chains, have done an execrable job. They have recruited students and not placed them. They have focused more on getting them to take out loans than they have on completing programs. And the quality of their programs haven't been good. What they are is mills turning out largely low income and people of color from their schools. My point is simply that we're going to see more quality stuff available. It's hard to compare what the Museum of Modern Art and Google are offering students to what we've seen at some of the proprietary chains. And given the relative advantage they offer, why not? Why not go there?
We have another question back here. Right here, I'm sorry.
Hi, thank you, Professor. I'm Michael Berman from California State University, where we're serving 250,000 adult students. happening, and we serve primarily, of course, a commuter student, although we do have residential programs. The message that I'm hearing from the students is largely that at this point, they think they're looking for something that's probably about 50% online. But they would like to have a significant portion of their education also face-to-face because they want to do music, they want to do drama, they want to meet other students, they want to have a seminar with a professor that they really respect and do that face-to-face. So what do you think about the prospects for general access, public institutions, really figuring out how to move to a hybrid environment where we can provide a reason to come sit on the log with Mark Hopkins, but we can also provide a lot of your education in a way that's convenient for you, that you can work around the full-time job and the parents and the children that you're caring for.
So the academic from California would like you to talk a little bit about a hybrid future, one that incorporates some of the traditional things that make going to campus worthwhile with some of the other innovations that you've been talking about getting things instantly online. A little combination, Arthur.
I'm not going to make you happy. I apologize. What I think is, I think hybrid's an intermediate stage. It's sort of like putting sails on a steamship. You don't need both. I think what we're going to see is online education get better and better and better, more and more personal, more and more touch. And at that point, people will have a real choice. Do I want to do this in person? Do I want to shop at a bookstore? Or do I want to go to Amazon? We saw in the book business that those companies that tried to do both didn't work. We've seen a lot of them close. And I fear that's what's going to happen. As a short-run strategy, I think it's a great idea. As a long-run strategy, I don't think it's a solution.
I'd like to take another question, but you're making me really miss Tower Records.
Oh.
Right here. I'm sorry.
My name is Cynthia, and I have a question. What about these ads you see splashed on about these universities that guarantee you a job, and they'll be there for your career with you? Yeah? I don't think so.
Do you think so, Arthur? She wants to know if those guarantees of jobs and careers.
I want a firm guarantee, and I want to know I'm going to get my money back, plus interest for time wasted if I can't get a job. I don't think promises or TV promises are something I want to rely upon. Sure they do.
Yeah.
If you're first generation, if you have no experience with higher education, why wouldn't you do that? It's the promise of a job, and we don't do a very good job of preparing people for the world that's coming, or even the world that exists.
Do you think, though, that business has a place in there for mentorship for these students as they come out of their high school years and try to position themselves educationally, and they can assist them in helping shape that?
Yeah, when I was talking about building traction with the street, that's exactly it. We're seeing so many partnerships now between for-profits and higher education, in which for-profits supplement what the colleges and universities are already doing. That's a wonderful device to consider for many colleges and universities.
Unfortunately, there are so many more good things to talk about here, more interesting things, but you're just going to have to read Arthur's book, which comes out in September. I think it's available for pre-order on Amazon. And I really want to thank him for giving us his time for this really interesting discussion about the future of higher education. So thanks all, and I think you'll be around not to sign copies of your book, but to answer any follow-up questions, right?
You got it.
Is your book going to be an actual book on paper, or?
Absolutely, with a hard copy, a hard cover.
God, that's so 2019. Or sorry about that.
And I'm really sorry about Tower Records, but you were wonderful.
That's all right. I'm going to get your book on a Kindle. Is that okay? Great.